The Chargers made a risky decision by letting standout undrafted free agent Rocket Sanders hit the waiver wire, and they paid the price.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 10 seasons, but this is our 8th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, the rocket has taken off, and unfortunately, he has landed in Cleveland. So no Rocket Sanders for the Chargers, and, you know, that sucks. Unfortunately, it's part of the process. It is part of the business of the NFL. The Chargers did bring back Phillips as well, and my man, Tony Jefferson, is back on the Chargers practice squad. All is right in the world. And speaking of that practice squad, the rest of the practice squad was also announced, and we got a couple of names we want to point out.
Absolutely. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. David, we were here yesterday hoping, praying that somehow Rocket Sanders, with his limited preseason production, I may point out, would be able to clear the waiver wire, but that was not the case because he was one of 3 Chargers that was claimed on the waiver wire. We'll talk about Trikweze, Bridges, and DaleVon Campbell as well, but the one that stood out, the one that everyone was up in arms about on Wednesday was Rocket Sanders, because he was a guy that I think even Chargers fans, even went 3.6 yards per carry, you could tell the dude belonged at this level and had some special traits to him. And all we did all week was say the last 5 years per Alex Katzen, only about 2% of players that are released get picked up by other teams. And obviously the Chargers.
So much for that, huh?
So much for that, right? But also I think, no wonder they felt the need to keep a Nico Reed and a Marlo Wax and an Eric Rodgers on the 53-man roster. The Chargers might have had 5 or 6 guys claimed had they not sculpted this roster the way that they did. But still, David, obviously when you have somebody like that who becomes like a kind of preseason darling, an undrafted darling, and they get claimed before you can bring him back on your practice squad, that obviously is pretty tough to see.
It is, because, I mean, you watch Rocket Sanders play, and, you saw what you wanted to see from him. You saw the way he moves, the way his vision was, the way he was able to be creative and continue to move forward and find spots, and just the physicality that he ran with. You're like, okay, man, this guy's got something. And I'd love to see what he could do behind the starting offensive line, not the backups and most guys that were not going to make a NFL roster, respectfully, right? I wanted to see what he was able to really do behind a legitimate offensive line. And unfortunately, at least it's not going to be with the Chargers. So we'll have to see what he does in Cleveland. But yeah, crazy that the fact that the Chargers had multiple guys get claimed off of waivers this season, which seems to be something that's very foreign.
Yeah, and I think just, the part of the reason it's foreign is because the Chargers didn't have very deep teams under the last regime, right? So a lot more of those guys were making the team and less guys were actually, other teams actually wanted, for lack of a better term. But I do think it is a little overblown, like losing him and the impact of what it'll mean to this season. Obviously, he would have been at best RB3 with Najee Harris working back in the mix now, so his impact this year may not have been seen, but you wanted to, see what that guy could do, see him develop, potentially have a long-term backup to Amarion Hampton, because Najee Harris is on a 1-year deal. You just waived your, 6th-round pick, Kamani Vidal, who's back on the practice squad, but still. So I just think that the question becomes, would a Kendall Williamson, would a Tucker Fisk have been able to clear the waivers so you could have kept those guys and maybe did things a little bit differently? And that you'll never really know, but at the same time, it's like, man, maybe that would have been worth, trying to take one less guy from somewhere else and sneak him through onto the active roster on cut down day. But with bad news also comes some good news, because Naji Harris is back at practice, David, and although Jim Harbaugh was non-committal that he would be out there for week 1, this is easily the best news that we've seen in this Najee Harris saga.
Yeah, I mean he's back in pads and a helmet, and he's moving around catching passes. So we know that he does have vision, and he can go out there and catch a pass. He can move around. This is all very, very good news. And obviously, all kidding aside, the Chargers know now that with what he has shown that he's got a lot closer, and he is on that doorstep, and he's ready to try to kick that thing down. And Coach Harbaugh said this. He's going to be limited. He'll work back in on playing for week 1. It is a possibility. So, yes, very non-committal, not saying yes or no, which is typical Jim Harbaugh style. That's just what he does. He's not going to give you any type of real information, no competitive advantages to anybody. Right. But, hey, you would expect nothing less from Jim Harbaugh. But with all that, it is great news. It is very good to see Najee Harris out there because he is a big part of what they want to do. They want to be able to wear on teams. They want to be able to have guys that in the fourth quarter can beat you up, drown you, and bring you back all the way down to triple zeros where the clock is, where they finish with the football. That's what Najee Harris is brought in to do. So hopefully he's ready to go. He's healthy. And he's ready to get this thing kicked off in Brazil.
And it's a big question as to whether he will be because, the clock is ticking. And he was working back and doing some individual stuff before the cut down day. So this isn't him just getting back out there and doing anything for the first time. But this is the most that we've seen from him, which is a great sign. And I think because of how weird it's been for him, I think people are kind of underrating what he can bring to the table and what he could mean to this offense. Like you said, pounding away. But I think the other part is especially with questions on your offensive line, you have someone that can just get those tough yards. He's averaged about 4 yards per carry. He's no frills, right? But he can get that kind of hidden yardage and find a little bit where there is nothing and keep you ahead of the stick. So I think because of how weird it's been, people are kind of underrating it. But man, you're talking about 8 days away from the first game. And a couple of those days are going to be travel. So can he really kind of get himself back in shape? Because it's not like an injury that you're worried about him re-aggravating. 4th of July is a far time away, right? But now it's like he's going to come back.
Keep this man away from any fireworks, Daniel.
He's not going to re-pull his hamstring, right? Or worried about trying to be back too early on an injured knee that he just got back from surgery on. So it's a little bit different and kind of harder to say. But the good news is this upcoming week we'll actually get a practice report and an injury report and get something more firm on that. But 2 other Chargers were claimed on waivers, and it was DaleVon Campbell. That one hurts a little bit, claimed by the Panthers. And surprisingly, Trikweze Bridges claimed by the Cowboys, while the Chargers were not awarded a single waiver claim, if they even made one. So, David, I think it speaks to the depth of this team. Like I brought up a little bit earlier, just the fact that, the Chargers' second most players that are getting claimed on waivers this year, and a couple, at least, in the case of DaleVon Campbell, that one that one I was really hoping to get back on the practice squad.
Yeah, me too. I really was because he showed the big playability. He had the size, he had the speed, he had the ability to go get the football, track it down the football field with that one play withstanding. But besides that, this guy was averaging 18 yards per reception in the preseason. So yeah, I definitely wanted to see him on the practice squad, but it's no surprise to me at all that he got claimed. They got scouts. Every single team does. They are paying attention. They are watching every single game, and it's clear that they were watching DaleVon Campbell, and they know that he was a guy that can help somebody right now with his ability. The surprising one for me is Trikweze Bridges. You watch the preseason for him, it was not a great experience. 12 receptions on 16 targets for 212 yards and a touchdown given up from him in the preseason. But, hey, best of luck from him in Dallas with the Cowboys. But yeah, definitely speaks in a hat tip to GM Joe Ortiz and his staff for finding players that are quality, that are going to help with the Chargers and with some other teams across the league.
Yeah, DaleVon Campbell, that's just a typical, prototypical practice squad guy, hoping you can develop him because he did have a skill set that can't be taught. Big, fast, showed that he could play above the rim and go up and get it when he needed to. And the Chargers really don't have that physical skill set on the roster. Would have been nice to see if they could nurture that, as they did with like a Tyrell Williams and guys like of that nature back in the day. But we still have more to get into because There was some more news, including maybe some expected news, because Eric Rodgers, the standout cornerback, was placed on IR, which let the Chargers bring back Delshon Phillips. But in bigger news, Tony Jefferson, T-Jeff Unk, is back with the squad. We're going to talk about that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. The preseason is over, and I know I'm ready for the real thing, and we have a huge slate of college football games this weekend, and I like college football. I love the NFL, but doing college football with PrizePicks is even better. So whether you've got your eye on big-name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, PrizePicks makes it easy to get in on the game, and it's super simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you can cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. Right now, one of the great things they have going on are max player discounts. They are basically going to give you one this week on Thursday night. We have the first NFL football game of the season, and you can get Dak Prescott max discounted, which means if you use him as one of your picks, all you need him to do is have more or less than 5 passing yards. That's it. That's a freebie right there. So download the PrizePicks app today and use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. PrizePicks, run your game. David, in a bit of roster gymnastics, as we told you guys would be happening over the next couple of days, the Chargers play standout cornerback Eric Rodgers on injured reserve, which is not super surprising. If you watched yesterday's show, this is something that we talked about potentially happening because the last time we saw him, he was in a walking boot. So it was very unrealistic to think that he was
Daniel.
where he was going to have some sort of, miraculous comeback and be part of the roster right away. And it was something they had to do because when they ended up putting Dean Leonard on the designated to return, Josh Harris on the designated to return, they either put Eric Rodgers on the season-long injured reserve, right, which sucks because it's like you really want to see what this guy can do after the small little bit we got to see, or, right, you would have to waive injure him, basically, and hope that he clears waivers, which, as we saw in the last segment, nobody was clearing waivers for the Chargers that had, picked up.
Definitely not a guarantee.
Man, no, definitely not a guarantee, and I think they would have been poached. I mean, those were the guys the Chargers thought were going to get poached. That's why they do this.
You saw your boy Willie Lampkin got poached.
Man, if the Chargers, it's stupid to some extent, but if the Chargers could have just claimed Willie Lampkin, and of course, a good team does claim him in the Eagles, right? I would have loved it, right? Leading the way for Amarion Hampton like he did at UNC. But this is cool, David, because he was someone that we weren't really sure what was going to happen, but it's like, man, this dude obviously has some promise. We talked a little bit about it on yesterday's, roster reaction show. Just it's like, hey, even if it's a small sample size, take some chances on some young corners and see what happens. That's what you did with Cam Hart. It's what you did with Tarheeb Still. It's what you did with Nico Reed. And those, have all been good stories so far.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see what the Chargers do because you'll have to make space for potentially him and Dean Leonard when these guys get back from the injuries.
Yeah, I mean, it was dominance from Eric Rodgers in the preseason. 5 targets, 0 catches, 0 yards allowed, 2 interceptions, including a pick 6, a forced fumble, a pass defense, a 0.0 passer rating allowed, no missed tackles. And of course, he got injured towards the end of that third preseason game, and that, kind of sucked.
Yeah, I think it was the second game, right?
Second preseason, yeah.
Yeah, it was literally the kickoff after a total, nothing play.
Yeah, which is terrible because, man, it seemed like he was really coming on, really kind of, getting his confidence, and he looked really, really good out there. So to get a guy like this who has some skills that, you want to be able to get back on the roster, has some size as well, I like the move, and hopefully, he's able to make his way back and be able to make himself something at the NFL level.
And in a corresponding move, David, we talked about some, handshake deals that were probably happening behind the scenes. It feels like the Chargers had one with Delshon Phillips because with Eric Rodgers going to IR, that lets the Chargers get Delshon Phillips back and puts them up to 5 linebackers on the roster.
Yeah, and I think that's a move that was expected for sure, especially, as we have mentioned multiple times, Coach Ficken, the special teams coordinator for the Chargers, had said that, hey, this guy is ready to go. He's squared away. He knows what he's doing. And, as you mentioned before the show, we were talking about it. This guy's been on the field a lot of special team snaps. So, and we know when he was brought in that this was going to be the guy that was the primary replacement for Nick Neiman, who was kind of your special teams ace before Del'Shawn Phillips was here. So not a surprise at all to see Del'Shawn Phillips back on the roster, and adds a little bit more depth, obviously, and with somebody who is more of a veteran to add to the room with Dayon and Denzel and Marlo Wax.
Well, and just kind of smart, roster move by the Chargers.
Yeah.
They knew that, they could get Del'Shawn Phillips back, and they weren't thinking that they could get Eric Rodgers back. So they did this and basically got to keep Eric Rodgers while also putting Del'Shawn Phillips right where he would have been. That's why I had him on my 53-man prediction, right? But yeah, you're talking about just under 1,400 special team snaps, only 271 career defensive snaps, so you know exactly why they're bringing him in. But I did think for a second they might try to go get Nick Neiman back, who was released after getting quite a check from the Texans, which is probably why he wasn't back. But
yeah, he was going to get $4 million to be sitting at home.
But also maybe Del'Shawn Phillips was thought to be an upgrade over Nick Neiman by this
very possible
staff too. That's what we don't know. But another great news, a guy obviously that we were a little upset wasn't back on the team, has some justice on Wednesday because the Chargers bring back Tony Jefferson on their practice squad. Still a guy who's too good to be playing on the Chargers practice squad, but great to get Unk back in the building, a great locker room guy, and someone that I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's on the active roster sooner rather than later.
I totally understand that you got to have the roster gymnastics, and with a player like Tony, who is a veteran, who has 10 years in the league, he's not subject to the waiver claim process. So he's an easy guy to be able to kind of maneuver a little bit, to be able to kind of make things work and make things happen. I still feel like he shouldn't have been subjected to that. I feel like he earned his spot, and so I really don't like the fact that they're having to move him around like that. I feel like this is a guy who was away from football, came back, played quality football for you last year, and was even better this year, in my opinion. I feel like he is definitely ready to go. He's in good shape. Like, he went out there and he performed very, very well. So I just don't like the fact that they're moving him, pushing him around like a pinball, and I hope they don't do that to him again this year. I hope it's one of those situations where they elevate him, they sign him to the active 53, and they give him his spot that I feel like he earned.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And just, great experience to have someone that's down the second year of your system. You know exactly what he brings to the table. I'm so glad that they brought him back. And let's be honest, they got lucky. And the downside of being on a practice squad means that he could get poached at any time. But maybe a slight overreaction from us yesterday about it just because he was there. And obviously he's a friend of the show, and it sucks to see someone who earned a roster spot not get one. And that's really what it was all about, even if you understand the roster gymnastics. But speaking of which, another guy added to the practice squad was the Chargers' new long snapper. Chargers signed Rick Lovato to the practice squad on Wednesday. And the only reason I bring this up is because I'm interested to see if the Chargers are potentially trying to exploit a loophole here, because he's not on the active roster, meaning they can keep all the guys they have, right, and only have to worry about keeping 2 specialists on the active roster. But at the same time, they could elevate him, right, and just use him that way and keep him on the practice squad because nobody's going to take him, right, as a temporary long snapper.
Right.
But you only get 3, and that's what me and you were talking about before the show. So if the Chargers were super, trying to get that loophole, maybe it's him the first 3 weeks. Maybe they find a 1-week rental the week after that. And obviously there's plenty of long snappers out there that would be very willing to do that and kind of, show what they can do and even get a game of tape. But it is interesting because the Chargers can't completely leave him off the roster, and Rick Lovato, that is, until Josh Harris gets back, because Josh Harris has to miss at least 4 games. But David, you also just couldn't have Tucker Fisk be your long snapper until Josh Harris comes back. So this is a move that was necessary. Interesting to see how they handle it.
Great to know that Tucker Fisk is capable of doing it, but yeah, you got to have a guy who is a long snapper by trade, right? That's exactly what they had to do. They brought in several guys to try out. He won the tryout there. This is a guy who's played 10 seasons in the NFL for 3 different teams, a 2019 Pro Bowler, and a 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the few players that was on both of those Super Bowl teams. So nice. A lot of experience. So this guy knows what he's doing. Hopefully he goes in there, does his job, gets his money, and moves on to the next job like the mercenary that he is.
Yeah, I mean, now he will. I mean, at least he is this year. Obviously, he must have stuck around with the Eagles for a while to be on both Super Bowl teams, but pretty cool to get someone with, a ton of experience, someone who's at least done it at a high level, especially trying to replace someone in an all pro for Josh Harris for a position that really, you don't want to notice them, right? That's the whole kind of
that's
thing.
Exactly
with
right.
Kind of like an offensive lineman, where it's like if you're not talking about him, it's probably a very good thing. Same is the case for a long snapper. It feels like they got someone at least that isn't shaky and should be able to go out there and do what they need him to do until Josh Harris comes back, because then he'll have to take his spot back on the active roster. But we still have more to get into, because it wasn't just those guys. The Chargers announced their full practice squad, and we're going to talk about not just the guys that made it and guys we're excited that made it, but also a couple of very surprising omissions from the practice squad as well, and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in 15 minutes, effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rougiette might be the answer, because over 150,000 men have already made the switch, and you can even read the real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to RougietteReady.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law and are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rougiette website for full safety information. The NFL season is here. I'm calling it. It's here now. And FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. I can't remember a better one than this one, David. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I can't think of a better way to be starting this upcoming season. But I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet, whether it's player props, building a same-game parlay with the boys, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds, and it makes every game more exciting. And the odds are already out for the Chargers' first game of the season, Friday night in Brazil, and they will enter as 3-point underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs. But if you think they can win outright, you can get them still at plus 132 to win the game straight up. So are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. All right, you guys, well, we still have much more to get into because the Chargers announced their practice squad. We won't be able to get into everyone individually today, but we did want to go through kind of the most noticeable guys that ended up there. And there were a couple of guys I was very excited to see get back on the Chargers roster for sure. But thank you for making us your first listen. If you guys are into college football, and another big moment from Locked On college football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present the College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson. What a big get. Former college star Jesse Hawley and Locked On's local experts. And you can catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. So I know I'm going to be checking that out. I'm trying to get a head start on the 2026 draft for sure. But let's talk about this practice squad, David. It was announced. We talked about a couple of the guys already. But to round it out, the Chargers kept safety linebacker Amani Johnson, Trikweze Jackson, Carson Barnhart, Naheem Miller-Hines, cornerback Harrison Hand, tight end IPP player Thomas Yasmin, defensive tackle Tyrod Edwards, the big man interception getter himself, able to bring back 6th-round pick Branson Taylor, and they also kept edge Garmin Randolph, found a way to keep DJ Uiagalelei, which I'm happy about too, cornerback Miles Purchase, Kamani Vidal, Jalen Reagor, center Josh Kaltenberger, and offensive tackle David Sharp. So, David, when you saw that list, who were the guys that kind of stood out to you? What was your first takeaway from it?
Yeah, I think for me, the first guy that stands out to me is Tyrod Edwards. I like the fact that he was able to get back on the Chargers practice squad after having that just absolutely diabolical simulated pressure interception there, and have a really nice return as well. And with the fact that the Chargers had 6 really high quality defensive linemen, it was going to be really, really hard for anyone else to be able to crack the 53. But
sure.
I feel like he played well when he got his opportunities. He looks like, he was a playmaker, and I'm glad to see him back on the roster. Also, DJU, I like what DJU has arm talent wise. I feel like this is a guy who is going to continue to benefit from having Coach Harbaugh and his staff there to help to continue to cultivate him and teach him and continue his development at the NFL level. This guy feels like he could be a potential backup quarterback sometime down the line.
Yeah, and if you could kind of find a long-term backup for Justin Herbert, someone to get some familiarity with the offense and stick around for a little while, that would be really great for the team. Also, you get both Kamani Vidal and Naheem Miller-Hines back, which I think especially in the absence of Rocket Sanders is a big, because, I mean, you may need one of those guys week one if Najee Harris isn't able to be back there. But I also think, like, Kamani Vidal could be solid in a reserve role. I don't think he had a chance to kind of put his best foot forward. Obviously played a ton of special teams as well for the Chargers, so he brings some value there. And I thought Naheem Miller-Hines still had some juice, man. Like, he brings a different
Yeah, I mean, he still broke some ankles out there.
Yeah, he did. I mean, obviously, he can't make the roster because if you put the ball on the ground 3 times in, 3 or 4 games, however many he played in, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough sell, I would say. But he does bring a different skill set than the hammerheads you have now with Amarian Hampton and Najee Harris and Hassan Haskins.
Triple H.
Yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're right. But, yeah, I mean, those are, I think 2 big guys to get back. Other guys I'm glad they kept. Jalen Reagor, this is a guy that we thought, especially at the beginning, before the Mike Williams signing, before the Chargers ended up bringing back Keenan Allen, who had a chance, they love him, had a chance to make the roster. If somebody goes down, you feel good about exactly what he's bringing to the table.
Yeah.
Miles Purchase, another guy. Miles Purchase and Amani Johnson, kind of 2 young defenders, David, who the Chargers can kind of keep an eye on, keep close to the vest, and potentially, or at least showed that they have potential down the road to turn into something more.
Yeah, I liked what Imani Johnson brought to the table, kind of that kind of hybrid safety,
he was all over the place, man.
Yeah, he was definitely all over the place, kind of that linebacker safety guy, that dime backer, sure, as you put it. I like what he brought to the table. I like also the fact that they got Branson Taylor back because, he didn't, he didn't play very well, but he got moved around a lot, and that's really hard, man, to have to go from one position to the next and have to completely change your practice habits and learn something completely new. Hopefully they can just say, hey, Branson, like, this is what we want you to focus on. And unfortunately for him, when you get into the regular season, there's not a whole lot of development that's going on. I mean, that's really for the off season. When you're in season, it's all about game planning specifically for each opponent. But hopefully he still gets some time to season and get better because, as we've talked about many times, there's not a lot of young youth on that offensive line for them to develop and to really see what the future of that position group is.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing. I mean, like we've talked about before, Zion Johnson, contract year. Andre James, 1-year contract. You have Mekhi Becton and Bradley Bozeman on the interior, but Jamari Sawyer, another guy in a contract year. Trey Pipkins in a contract year. So big turnover kind of happening no matter what next year, it feels like right now. And it's hard to feel great about the reserve offensive lineman you have there. I'm glad about, Branson Taylor, but Carson Barnhart, unplayable. David Sharp, I thought was okay. Josh Kaltenberger, good size for a center. Definitely, had some promising moments, but that entire, basically just kept the second string line of the guys that were out there in the preseason that made it pretty much impossible to give you a fair evaluation of not just the running backs, but the quarterbacks as well.
Yeah.
So I was also surprised, David, by a couple of omissions from the practice squad. And I think I would start with Tremont Morris-Brash. Luke Grimm, also another guy we thought might get another shot with the practice squad, especially after returning a punt 66 yards to the house is worth something. But muffed 2 in his final showcase game, which was really tough to watch. But Tremont Morris-Brash had 13 pressures in 4 games in the preseason. The next closest guy was Caleb Murphy, who made the roster with 6. He over-doubled everybody else. I'm really surprised the Chargers are keeping Garmin Randolph and not keeping Tremont Morris-Brash, or at least bringing him back to the practice squad.
Yeah, that one was definitely a huge surprise to me. I think for Luke Grimm, I understand. You put the ball on the ground, you muff a couple of punts, and you didn't do a whole lot on the offensive side. that was your calling card. That's what, brought you to the table, was your special teams ability. And we saw the high of it and we saw the low of it. And the low of it, unfortunately, was too low for the Chargers to want to bring him back. And for Tremont Morris-Brash, this is the guy who's been around the Chargers for a little while. And I felt like, was making some hay. He was making some headway to try to get to that roster. But, the Chargers decided to go in another direction.
Yeah, and he didn't sign any other practice squad, at least that I could find. He was not claimed on waivers. So very interesting, especially, second year in the program. You kind of know what you have in him, and someone that I thought had 2 really good preseasons the last couple of years. So we'll see if that changes at all. No Brendan Rice, which officially kind of ends that saga. And also no Taylor Heineke, right? That's another part of the DJ Youth, part of things here. I'm sure Taylor Heineke's kind of waiting for the call to go get a decent bag to be somebody's backup for sure. I don't know. He'll probably have an active roster chance, even if he didn't get claimed.
Yeah.
But Brandon Rice, Taylor Heineke, they're not there. DJU is back on the practice squad, which, again, I agree with you. I think worth developing, seeing if he's that guy. And also, David, another piece of news and notes that I know you wanted to get to today was the Chargers naming their captains for this season. What did you like about that?
Yeah, I like the fact that Joe Alt was named an offensive captain. That is really, really cool for a second-year player to show that level of leadership already. To be a captain is awesome, to go along with, of course, Justin Herbert, Bradley Bozeman, Keenan Allen as an alternate. And then on defense, I think the name that sticks out, besides the 2 obvious, Khalil Mack and Derwin James, is Deion Henley being named a captain. I love me some Deion Henley. I've said it many, many times. This guy is on the verge of superstardom. I think he's going to break out and really start to establish himself as one of the top 5 best middle linebackers in the game.
Absolutely. Alternate Denzel Perryman on that side, showing he still kind of has that. But this is a meaningful, noticeable step for Deion Henley, who has taken on more of a vocal leadership role on this team, which is so cool to see for someone that, kind of got cast aside as a rookie 3rd-round pick and then, has come back the way that you hope other guys would be able to respond to that kind of adversity. So,
yeah,
shout out to Deion Henley. Of course, Bradley Bozeman's on it, and I think shows you part of the reason he's here, right? For me, I'd much rather, be on field success, how you determine to sign these players. But I think this is just a little snippet of just how much you can see this guy means to this team, to that locker room, to his quarterback. And also, shout out Keenan Allen, man. He's an alternate offensive captain, which I don't think is a small thing, considering he just got back. So, him kind of picking up where he left off, him being a captain in a young wide receiver room that really needs him to be that, right? And I think that's Jim Harbaugh putting that on his chest a little bit and being like, hey, man, yes, you're here to help us win this season. But it's more than that, because you have, 5 other young dudes, even more than that with the practice squad, that are looking up to you, hoping, and following your example. So I think that was a sign of that when you see that. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Thank you to everyone who checked out, today and as always. But we do know that we were supposed to do a buy or sell show today. We did not expect all of the news that we were going to get today. So we'll probably do, a buy or sell show tomorrow. We got some good ones that we'll definitely use tomorrow, but we also might do some Fan Mail Friday stuff too, since it is Friday. But we haven't got to hear from you guys for a while, so make sure you hit us up on all of our social media, at Locked On LAC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find the show on all of those places every single day as well. And also, if you want to call into the voicemail line, leave a 30-second Chargers voicemail at 323-524-7924 for a good chance to get on the show. But to make sure you don't miss the show, the best way is always to follow or subscribe for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. Me and David were talking about it. I don't think the roster moves are over. I don't think the roster gymnastics are over. So there's a good chance we'll be back with you guys tomorrow with more news as the only daily Chargers podcast out there. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.